The autumn sky had already darkened when the library doors of Crestwood College swung open. Students poured out, backpacks slung over their shoulders, their weary eyes reflecting the strain of exams and assignments. But among the crowd, three girls strolled together. Emily, Sarah, and Mia dotted 21. They were inseparable. Where one went, the others followed. Their bond wasn't just forged in lectures and group projects. It was laughter echoing through dorm hallways at midnight, whispered secrets about crushes, shared meals when money was tight, and shoulders leaned on during heartbreaks. That Friday evening, they felt liberated. Their papers were submitted, their exams were finished, and the weekend had arrived. Emily nudged Sarah playfully. "We deserve real food tonight, not cafeteria pizza." Mia chuckled. "Finally, something that doesn't come in a cardboard box." They settled on a small family-owned restaurant just a few blocks from campus. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of roasted nuts from a nearby street vendor. Streetlights cast a warm yellow glow as the three walked side by side, arms brushing, chatting about everything and nothing. Inside the restaurant, the cozy clatter of dishes and the aroma of garlic welcomed them. They ordered too much food, pasta, fries, milkshakes, and sat together, their laughter rising above the soft music playing in the background. For a moment, it felt like the world outside didn't exist, but when they stepped out of the restaurant later that night, the world reminded them of its ugliness. On the sidewalk, two men leaned against a parked car, bottles in their hands, their voices loud and unsteady. They were clearly drunk, their eyes glassy, their laughter sharp and mocking. As Emily, Sarah, and Mia passed by, the men straightened. "Where you girls headed?" One called, his words slurred but his tone laced with arrogance. The girls exchanged glances and kept walking, but the men followed. Their footsteps grew heavier, their laughter crueler. One of them moved closer, stumbling, until he reached out and grabbed Sarah's wrist. "Don't be shy, sweetheart," he said. His breath reeking of alcohol. The world froze for a second. Emily gasped. Mia's face went pale, but Sarah's eyes turned sharp. Her years of martial arts training surged to the surface in a flash. She twisted her wrist free in a swift motion, her body moving with instinct. With a sharp strike of her palm, she sent the man staggering backward, his bottle crashing to the ground. The second man lunged angrily, but Sarah was faster. With a clean kick to his midsection, she knocked the air out of him, sending him stumbling onto the hood of the car. Her voice cut through the night, cold and unwavering. "Women are not your prey. Remember this." The men groaned in pain, too shocked to respond. Emily and Mia stood frozen, their eyes wide with a mixture of fear and pride. The girls didn't stay to watch the drunks crawl away. Sarah turned, her friends falling in step beside her, and together they walked quickly back toward campus. Their hearts pounded, but they held their heads high. They thought the night was over. They thought they had left the danger behind. But what happened the next day would prove otherwise. The next day unfolded like any ordinary Saturday on campus. Crisp morning sunlight spilled across the college lawn, where students lounged with coffee cups and backpacks. By late afternoon, lectures had ended, and the main gate of Crestwood College buzzed with chatter. Emily, Sarah, and Mia walked side by side, the easy rhythm of friendship in their steps. They talked about their plans for the evening, movies, snacks, and maybe even a sleepover at Emily's dorm. The bruises on Sarah's wrist from last night's struggle were faint, but her friends noticed. "You were incredible," Mia said. Quietly. Emily nodded. Yeah, but you scared me half to death. Sarah smiled softly, brushing it off. I wasn't about to let those guys think they could get away with it. The moment should have been light. It should have been safe. But as they reached the edge of the campus, the air changed. The laughter and voices around the gate fell silent, like someone had pressed pause on the world. Two men stood across the road, blocking the exit. Emily froze. Her stomach dropped. It was them. The same drunk men from the night before. Only now they weren't in casual clothes. They wore police uniforms, pressed and buttoned, badges glinting in the sun. The arrogance on their faces was sharper than ever. Mia whispered in disbelief. No, it can't be. One of the men, the taller one, stepped forward with a smirk. That chilled the girls to their bones. His voice carried across the stunned crowd. Sarah Mitchell, you are under arrest for assaulting duty officers while they were performing their service last night. Gasps rippled through the students gathered nearby. Sarah's face went pale. You weren't on duty. You were drunk, harassing us. Her words were cut short by the brutal crack of a baton against her cheek. The sound echoed like a gunshot. Sarah stumbled backward, clutching her face as blood welled on her lip. Emily screamed. Mia rushed forward, but another officer shoved her back hard, nearly knocking her to the ground. Stay out of it, he barked. Chaos erupted around the college. Gate. Students shouted. Phones came out, and whispers of police brutality spread through the crowd. But the officers ignored them. Their focus was on Sarah, who now stood dazed, her wrists being forced into cold steel handcuffs. The taller one leaned close to her ear, his voice dripping with menace. You should have known better than to humiliate. U.S. Nobody touches an officer and walks away. Tears burned in Emily's eyes as she tried to push through. She didn't do anything. You're lying. The officers dragged Sarah toward a waiting police van, their boots crunching against the gravel. Her hair fell over her face, her body jerking under their rough grip. For a moment, she looked back at her friends. Her eyes, swollen, defiant, yet full of fear, locked with Emily's and Mia's. And then the van doors slammed shut, swallowing her whole. The crowd's anger grew louder, but fear silenced action. Students watched helplessly as the vehicle roared away, siren wailing. Emily and Mia stood frozen at the gate, tears streaming down their faces. Their friend had been taken, beaten, accused, and branded a criminal for daring to defend herself. But as shock gave way to determination, Mia whispered through clenched teeth, they don't know who they just messed with. Emily pulled out her phone, her hands trembling. Together, they began to dial, first their own parents, then Sarah's. The fight for justice had just begun. The campus was still buzzing with chaos, long after the police van disappeared down the road. Students stood in clusters, some replaying the moment on shaky phone recordings, others whispering in disbelief. But Emily and Mia weren't whispering. They were trembling, panicked, and furious. Emily clutched her phone like it was a lifeline. Her hands shook as she tried to scroll through her contacts. Mia grabbed her wrist. Call your mom first. Tell her everything. Then we'll call Sarah's parents. Her voice cracked, but her determination was sharp. Meanwhile, inside the police van, Sarah sat wedged between the two men who had once stumbled drunkenly outside a restaurant. Now in their uniforms, they were predators with power. Her cheek throbbed where the baton had struck, the metallic taste of blood filling her mouth. The handcuffs dug into her skin. One officer smirked, leaning close. You think you can humiliate us in public? You're going to learn tonight what happens when you raise a hand to the law." Sarah's jaw tightened. She wanted to scream too, fight back, but she knew one wrong move could cost her life. When the van screeched into the police station yard, she was yanked out like a criminal, dragged past curious stares of other officers who didn't dare question what was happening. Within minutes, she was thrown into a cold, dim cell. The iron door clanged shut. Her bruised face caught the flicker of the overhead bulb. She sat on the concrete floor, heart pounding, the echo of the officer's laughter rattling through the hall. Back at the college, Emily's call finally went through. Her mother's voice answered, warm at first, then tightening with alarm as Emily's words tumbled out. "They arrested Sarah. They said she attacked officers. They hit her in front of everyone. Mom, please, she didn't do anything. They're lying." Her mother's voice was firm. "Stay calm. I'll be there soon. But you must call her parents right now." Mia's hands trembled as she typed Sarah's father's number. The ring seemed endless. When the line finally clicked, a deep, commanding voice answered. "This is Director Mitchell." Mia swallowed hard. Her throat felt dry, but she forced the words out. "Sir, I am Mia, Sarah's friend. The police, they took her. They said she attacked officers, but it's not true. They beat her and dragged her away." The silence on the other end was heavy, dangerous. Then came his low response. "Where is she?" Emily leaned closer, whispering into the speaker. "Crestwood Police Station. Please, you have to help her." There was no panic in his reply, only steel. "Stay where you are. Don't say another word. We're coming." He hung up. Mia looked at Emily, her face pale. "Do you know who that was?" "Her dad is the FBI." Emily's eyes widened. "And her mom, she's the former Chief Justice." The weight of those names settled in their chests. What had seemed like an impossible fight a few minutes ago now carried a spark of hope, but also a storm of reckoning that neither of them could quite imagine. At that very moment, across the city, a woman in a tailored black suit closed the leather case on her desk. Her once quiet evening had just been shattered by a phone call. She was no longer the sitting Chief Justice, but the authority still burned in her presence. And now it was personal. Her husband, one of the highest-ranking officials in the FBI, tightened his tie and picked up his phone. Orders began moving through federal lines like lightning. 2 corrupt officers had made the gravest mistake of their lives. They thought they had power. They thought they could silence a girl. But now, justice itself was on its way to the station. The morning sun broke over Crestwood, but the city didn't wait quietly. By sunrise, the courthouse was already surrounded by reporters, their cameras pointed like weapons toward the heavy oak doors. The story of a young college girl arrested for assaulting officers had spread like wildfire overnight. Students who had witnessed the attack had shared shaky phone videos online. Millions had already seen the truth. Inside a small cell at the police station, Sarah sat pale and bruised, her arms wrapped around her knees. She hadn't slept. Every sound in the hallway, the shuffle of boots, the clatter of keys, sent fear racing through her chest. She didn't know what was waiting for her outside, but deep down she clung to a fragile hope. Her parents were coming. And then they arrived. The double doors of the precinct swung open as FBI Director Mitchell stepped in, his badge flashing under the fluorescent lights. His stride was sharp, unyielding. Behind him, his wife, the former Chief Justice of the United States, walked with the same gravitas she once carried in the nation's highest court. Her piercing eyes swept the room, and the chatter of the officers died instantly. "Where is my daughter?" Her voice cut like a blade. The desk sergeant stammered. She's in holding, ma'am, but..." "No buts," Director Mitchell barked, slamming a signed federal order onto the desk. "Release her, now." Within minutes, Sarah stumbled out from behind the iron bars, her wrists red from the cuffs, her eyes wide with relief. She collapsed into her mother's arms, sobbing. The room froze as the former Chief Justice held her. Daughter whispering, "They will pay for this." Every last one of them. Hours later, the courthouse brimmed with tension. On one side sat the two crooked officers, their uniforms stiff, their faces smug but strained. Their lawyer whispered strategies into their ears, but even he looked nervous. On the other side sat Sarah, flanked by her parents and her two best friends. Emily and Mia squeezed her hands, promising silently they would never leave her side. When the judge entered, the room fell into silence. The gavel struck. Court is now in session. The prosecutor began with the officers' claims that Sarah had attacked them while they were on duty, endangering public safety. Their words dripped with arrogance, twisting the story into one where they were the victims. But then came the defense. Sarah's mother stood. Even though she was no longer Chief Justice, her presence was undeniable. She adjusted her glasses, her voice calm but thunderous. "Your Honor, what we have here is not an assault. It is an abuse of power. It is two men who thought their badges gave them the right to harass, to strike, and to lie." She gestured to the screen as a video began to play. Shaky footage from a student's phone showing the moment outside the college gate. Gasps filled the courtroom as the truth unfolded. The officers stepping forward, one striking Sarah with a baton, then dragging her away while she never raised a hand in retaliation. Do these look like men carrying out their duty? She demanded, her voice ringing through the chamber. Or predators in uniform, disgracing the very badge they wear? The officers shifted in their seats, beads of sweat forming on their foreheads. Then Sarah's father rose. His words were short, sharp, and lethal. "These men not only assaulted my daughter, they corrupted the very oath they swore to uphold. And for that, justice will not be mercy. It will be accountability." When Sarah herself was called to the stand, the room hushed. Her voice trembled at first as she recounted the dinner, the harassment, and the fear when she saw the same men in uniforms. But as she spoke of the beating at the college gates, something changed. Her voice grew stronger. "They thought I was weak. They thought I'd stay silent. But I won't. Not for me, and not for any girl who's been told she doesn't have the right to walk outside at night without fear." The gallery erupted in murmurs, students and families nodding in solidarity. Even the judge leaned forward, listening with unusual intensity. By the afternoon, the verdict came. The judge's gavel struck hard. "These officers are hereby found guilty of abuse of power, wrongful arrest, and assault. They will be stripped of their badges and face criminal sentencing." The officers' faces went pale as bailiffs closed in, cuffing the very hands that had once struck Sarah. Sarah's mother reached for her daughter's hand. Her father placed his arm protectively around her shoulders. Emily and Mia wept tears of relief. But Sarah wasn't crying. She lifted her chin, her eyes locked on the two men being dragged away. For the first time since that night, she smiled faintly, not because the pain was gone, but because justice had spoken louder than their violence. And in that courtroom, a message echoed far beyond the wooden walls. No badge, no uniform, no abuse of power would ever silence the truth again. The courthouse emptied slowly that evening, but the air outside still vibrated with the weight of what had happened inside. Reporters swarmed the steps, their microphones thrust toward Sarah and her parents. Students held signs of support, some reading, "Justice for Sarah," others simply, "No more abuse of power." But Sarah didn't rush to the cameras. She stood, still at the top of the steps, the wind catching her hair, her mother and father at her side, Emily and Mia just behind her. For a long moment, she let herself breathe, deeply, freely, without fear. Her mother's hand squeezed her shoulder. "You stood taller than most grown men in there today. Remember that." Her father leaned close, his voice quieter, meant only for her. "They thought you were powerless. But they learned today, the truth is never powerless." Later that night, the family sat together at home for the first time since the ordeal. The weight of the trial still lingered, but so did something else, strength. Sarah's bruises were still tender, her wrists still sore, but her spirit felt lighter. She sat across from Emily and Mia, who had refused to leave her side for a single moment. They laughed quietly about their old college plans, movie nights, study groups, graduation trips. But eventually, Sarah grew serious, her eyes fixed on her two best friends. "You know what scares me the most?" she said softly. "It's not what they did. It's how easily they thought they could get away with it. How many times have they done this before to someone who didn't have people to fight for them?" The room fell silent. Even her parents leaned in. "That's why this can't just be about me," Sarah continued. Her voice didn't shake now. "This has to be about every girl who's been told to stay quiet, every kid who's been told the system will never listen. We have to keep pushing, keep fighting, because if we don't, nothing changes." Her words hung heavy in the room, but also hopeful. Her mother, the former Chief Justice, smiled faintly, spoken like someone ready to carry a torch. The following week, Sarah returned to campus. Students lined the walkway to greet her. Some clapped, others simply hugged. Professor shook her hand, whispering, "We're proud of you." But the moment that stayed with her most was when a younger student, a freshman with wide, fearful eyes, approached her timidly. "Sarah," she whispered, I saw what happened. I've been scared to speak up about something that happened to me, but after watching you, I think maybe I can." Sarah knelt down, her hand steady on the girl's arm. "You can," she said firmly, "and you're not alone." News channels carried the story for weeks. Commentators debated, activists marched, and families across the nation sat around dinner tables discussing what had happened in Crestwood. For once, it wasn't just another headline. It was a warning and a promise. The police department announced sweeping reforms. Body cameras became mandatory. Officers with prior misconduct records were suspended and investigated. The two corrupt officers were sentenced to prison, their badges forever stripped away. And Sarah? She chose not to disappear into the shadows. She began speaking at rallies, at schools, even on national television. Her words weren't angry, they were steady, rooted in truth. "They tried to take my voice," she said in one interview, her eyes unwavering. "But instead, they gave me a reason to use it louder than ever before." Months later, standing on the steps of her college at graduation, Sarah looked out at the crowd, her parents, Emily, Mia, students who had become like family. She smiled, her cap tilted slightly, the sun warm on her face. She had learned the hardest lesson of all. Justice is never given freely. It is demanded, fought for, and carried forward. And as the applause rose around her, she knew the fight wasn't just hers anymore, that it belonged to everyone who had ever been silenced. And now, the silence was broken.